welcome once again to Ewtn's Bookmark. I'm Doug Keck, your host. Our special guest author is Lisa Hendey, author of The Grace of Yes, published by Ave Maria Press. Welcome, Lisa,
to
Ewtn's Bookmark. We had you on quickly when we were doing a walk around at one of the CMMs where you were repping, was it this particular press at the time we were talking to you about?
Yes, my new book, The Grace of Yes.
Okay, we got to talk to you there. Now, you've been on multiple shows on Ewtn over the years, right?
Actually, no, this is my second opportunity to be here
were you
on
campus.
with
Catholic
Catholic Moms
You were on with
Cafe.
Donna,
Yes.
That's what it was. Okay,
Yes.
Donna Marie Cooper O'Boyle's program. Okay, great. So, what have you been waiting for here? I guess an invitation,
Well, thanks
right?
for having
An
me.
invitation. So it was great to see you. And we've been thinking of trying to get you here for a long time because a lot of people know your name over the years, not even so much as necessarily being an author, but somehow really one of the early blogging people out there, right? I mean, I remember Amy Wellborn seemed to be one of the earlier ones we would tend to be familiar with, but you were right there back in what, 2000?
Well, the website started before there was really even blogging per se, back in late 1999, early 2000, CatholicMom.com, and it has kind of evolved into the rest of this work that I do. But yeah, I'm a blogging, I hate to say dinosaur, but one of the early bloggers out there.
Well, you were respected enough to get invited to the Vatican, right, when they had that conference and everything?
The Vatican Bloggers meeting, that was incredible. I held at the same time as the beatification of John Paul II, and what a great thing to gather with 150 bloggers from around the world. And it really showed that, you know, the Vatican was taking notice of what we were doing as well.
Now, you talk about in The Grace of Yes, 8 Virtues for Generous Living. You talk a little bit about your life and kind of set it up as well, and how you got into deciding to blog. When you came up with the name for your blog and for your website, at the time, how did you go about saying, well, what do I do with this? I mean, what did you know about it? You were helping out at your children's school, weren't you?
Yes, essentially I knew nothing about it. It was kind of interesting that I share a little bit about this in the book, which is kind of a memoir, but I share about how I had accepted this volunteer job at my children's Catholic school to take on the school website, and at that time I knew how to check my email on AOL and how to make a greeting card.
AOL, there you go, right.
So,
that's right.
Back in the day.
They could always tell if people were a little older, but because they had an email address that said AOL, like I did for many years.
I cling to that, Hendey at AOL.
Right.
But, you know, that was really as a service project for our school. And then at the same time, my children were preparing for sacraments. My husband is a convert to the faith at that time.
Lutheran?
Yes. Raised Lutheran, but really their family didn't really attend much of anything. So that weight of being
domestic. But he did go to Notre Dame, and that's where you met,
exactly.
Right? So,
my dad teases me that he sent me to Notre Dame, and I found the one non-Catholic who wasn't on the football team. And
oh, there you go. Okay, right. Okay.
But anyway, at that time of preparing for Eric's first communion, I began to really feel the weight of being domestic church, you know, with Greg, but really on my own at that point. And so I went looking online, and there wasn't really much of anything, and something prompted me to, not because I knew what I was doing, but because I was searching for information to start this website. And I assumed that there would be other women out there like me who really wanted to find, you know, tools for growing in our own faith so that we could better educate our children. So that's how it started.
Okay, so you get started, you do that, and in the early days of blogging, really, it was kind of a little more like a diary. Sometimes it would kind of be like, today I got up and it was raining outside, and I picked up the kids at school, and I felt a little bad, and it was kind of, sometimes it could be just a few lines. It's almost like a larger version of what Twitter is for people today, where they just kind of, if you took all their tweets and put them together, it would be like the early days of that. But it's evolved past that into a form of journalism, and many times people are basically writing columns like you would normally have seen in a newspaper, right?
Exactly. One of the places that I blog now is actually Patheos.com, which is a large multi-faith portal, and there I do much more news-oriented blogging. It's kind of following my own evolution in our family life as my children have grown and left the home. But one of the things that I think distinguishes blogging and that's really critical on faith issues is this ability to be in dialogue with our readers. So whereas a website used to be that, you know, you just kind of spew out information, the blog format enables you to be in
more
conversation
interactive.
with
Yeah,
people,
okay.
which is really perfect for the faith relationship that we're having, like in using this in the new evangelization. Our job as bloggers is not just to write at people, but to journey with them in their own faith journey.
Sounds like what the Holy Father's talking about today,
Exactly.
that whole encounter accompaniment approach. So when you put out a blog like that and people start to ask questions or hit the combo, do you respond yourself while that's happening then,
Yes,
to what it is?
absolutely, absolutely. And I think that's a critical part for me of being an effective blogger. Some bloggers don't open their com boxes, but I do. And often as a blogger, the biggest fruit in what you write happens in the com boxes. If you create and cultivate a respectful dialogue there,
Right.
it can really take the theme that you've written about and then, create this whole new, openness in the communication. It's very different from book writing where, again, you're putting something out there. And so that was a bit of training for me to transition from blogging to
Now,
book writing.
in this book, The Grace of Yes, 8 Virtues for Generous Living, you open up, my parents believed and I trusted them, so I believed. And later on you said, I have tried to submit my life to God. How does one submit their life to God? How do you do
For me, that is a daily yes. Getting back to the title of this
the book,
The
right.
Grace of Yes. But really, for me, it's a daily recommitment to, the creed that we profess, to what we are taught and what we believe as Catholics. But I'll admit that every day I have to kind of recommit myself to what is it in the craziness of everything that I'm doing that I really believe in, and how does that edify the rest of my day? So morning prayer is a huge thing for me.
You also talk about being committed to a spirit, to the generosity of spirit. Define that the way you define it.
So there's this connection in my mind between professing a belief in Jesus Christ and in the Catholic Church, and then what that sends us out in the world to do. So I really believe that it's not enough for me to just say, yes, I believe, but that has to compel all of my actions, including being a loving person in every interaction that I have through the day. So that's not always necessarily organized charity work. It's, we've mentioned Pope Francis as he models for us, seeing Christ in the face of everyone that we interact with, even in our own homes.
Especially, sometimes that's the hardest, they say.
Right, exactly.
Sometimes it's easy to see Christ in distant people. It's,
Yes.
up close, it's not so clear all the time. You also talk about here, my hope for the exploration of the 8 virtues, and we'll talk about those, around which this book is built, is that you claim a new faith-inspired yeses of your own life. Then you say, generous living entails both openness to God's plan and a plan of our own. How do we differentiate which is which?
I think too often we have a tendency to think that what we desire is of God, and this is where cultivating time for silent prayer, time in front of Eucharistic adoration, just quiet moments throughout the day, and a check-in with what our agenda is for the day, to really see, is this of God or is this Lisa's plan for today? And it's obvious to me so many times when I really stop and pay attention that the things that I consider throwing me off my to-do list for the day, those are the God moments. Those are the moments where I'm called to pause in that moment and, to really see what God has for me to do.
And that's why at the end of each chapter, your questions, you call them to ponder.
Yes.
In a sense, because what we really need to be doing in this pell-mell existence we have is sometimes stop, take a breath, and reflect on what am I doing, what is really so important, what am I really upset about, those kind of things. Now, and the first one is the grace of belief, but I wanted to ask you one other question here. You say that together may we praise God who pokes, prods, and kindly leads us towards the awesome grace of ever deepening yes. What would you say has been God's biggest poke or prod for you in your life?
It's my husband, I have to say, because for so many years I prayed for my husband's conversion, and I shared this in the book, but when I came to the realization that the person who really needed to be converted was me, so much happened in my life. And so walking in companionship with Greg and being there for his spiritual journey kind of helped me to see, where I was falling short in my own, and coming to that conclusion was huge.
Well, you say to some degree, though you were very Catholic in your perspective and view of things and trust in the Lord, there was a certain amount of what's in it for me.
Yes, absolutely.
Which seemed to change when you ended on the buckle of the Bible Belt in Nashville, Tennessee, right?
Yes. After our graduation from Notre Dame, we were married in the Basilica there, and then went on to Vanderbilt University. I worked in the Human Resources office there, and I went from being this incredibly Catholic upbringing, Catholic elementary school, high school, college, to suddenly not very many people around me are Catholic, and I was going to Mass alone, and it was sad, and I felt lonely and that I wasn't being fed, but I realize now the reasons for that. At the time I didn't. So I needed to be, even though I'd been confirmed in elementary school, I needed that reconfirmation.
Right. It's interesting, I think, here, what you talk about, something a lot of us can relate to. I didn't stop believing. It just began to feel like work.
Yes.
Perhaps the very first turn to my yes was my own, and I gave it begrudgingly, feeling like it was more like the classic Sunday obligation.
Absolutely. Okay. I'm sad to say it, but absolutely that's what it was.
Now, what would the 50-year-old Lisa want to tell the 20-something yuppie? If you could go back in time, as you talk about here, what would the message be in your mind?
The message would be that as believers, as Catholics, as Christians, it's not enough for us to go to Mass on Sunday, that being a part of the family of God and the body of Christ means giving ourselves fully all the time, and just that giving ourselves. So it's not enough just to show up at Mass and want the music to be great and the priest to give a good homily. What am I doing to make my parish community the place I desire to worship in? And then also, how does what I proclaim on Sunday when I receive the Eucharist, yes, I believe, amen, how does that edify my life the rest of the week?
And how long did it develop in your own mind to get to the point where your mantra became your plan, meaning God, your plan, my yes?
I'd say I'm still working on that.
Okay, so you're still working on that stuff.
If I'm being honest, but
sometimes it's your plan, my yes.
Lisa's, yeah, exactly what Lisa wants. You know what? I think we all. For me, it really happened as my children were. First of all, the point where I committed to being a stay-at-home mom was a big thing, because
you talk about that because
letting go a lot of the trappings that come with career.
Because you went to Notre Dame and
have a master's and had a great career, and then realizing that primary vocation, but not that at a certain point I realized that didn't mean what I gave up, but rather what I was getting, what God had put in my path, and wow, how miraculous that He's led me to where I am now. But that reminder for me, that mantra, as I say, your will, my yes, is very important on a day-to-day basis, and sometimes I fail, often I fail.
Now, obviously, once you kind of stepped out with the CatholicMom.com and stuff, when you spend, I guess ongoing, when you spend your waking hours working in the spiritual realm, there are very real dangers. What do you mean when you say that?
Well, first of all, there's the danger that people perceive a holiness in you that maybe isn't necessarily there, that you have it all figured out. And I never started blogging because I had it all figured out. This is a journey for me, and I want a journey in companionship with others. So that's why I write. And I think we can kind of put out the best parts of ourselves out there in social media, in interactions that we have online, and withhold, our own fragility, our own struggles with our faith. And so I think it's dangerous that we could put a false perception out there of, somebody that's not really who we truly are.
Right, and maybe starting to worry more about how we're perceived than actually how we're living.
Right.
And things like that. You say, Jesus, I trust in you, I believe, help me in my disbelief, I am yours. I've got the first two down. So the last one I'm still working on, the I am yours part. What does this mean? If we can share a passion for a slab of cake, I know a lot of people who can, with a lot of conviction, why is it so excruciatingly difficult for us to share our beliefs?
So in that part of the book, I'm talking about how, if you're a man, so maybe this doesn't happen with men, but women love to go out for dinner together, and somebody might order a dessert and, volunteer to share it. Exactly. And at first there's nobody will take it, except me. I always take the cake. And, we're all by the end saying, oh, this cake is so great, you've got to try it. We're telling the people at the table next to us. But with our faith, which is the greatest thing in the world, often we're reluctant to share what we are so passionate about, because we don't want to make people feel uncomfortable. We don't want to embarrass ourselves with the chance that we might be rejected.
We don't want to step out.
Yeah, exactly. Why will we do it with cake, but we won't do it with the good news of the gospel?
Right.
It's ridiculous, right?
Now you talk about let's say it's the grace of belief, generativity, creativity, integrity, humility, vulnerability, the grace of no, and the grace of rebirth. Now, what is generativity?
Everyone asks about that and asks if I made it up.
Yeah, but you didn't, because you quote
Eric
the Webster's here,
yes.
right? And there actually was a meaning for that word, right?
Yes.
Came out of the 1950s, a
yes.
psychoanalyst or somebody came up with
Erickson,
it, right?
And it's one of these progressions of through different states of life. And it really, generativity is this concern that we have, and I know you have it in your work, Doug, where we begin to be concerned with fostering the generations that are coming up behind us, whether that be our own children or people that we work with, friendships that we have, that our concern becomes less with our work, what am I creating, and more, how am I enhancing the people who work with me, and leaving a legacy through what they'll accomplish.
Right, how are they being impacted? Now, and you talk about bending so we don't break. My parents have long had a wonderful saying, never leave one good party in search of another. I was thinking about that, and you're talking about it as a comment that your parents make. I always think that that's part of the biggest problem with divorce in the world we live in today, is that's what people are doing. They're leaving where they are, thinking there's some better party going on someplace that they're missing out on.
Absolutely. That was Daddy's phrase. My mom and Dad have a beautiful marriage, 53 years this year, and this never leave one good party in search of another. It relates to parties, but marriage is a beautiful relationship, and also sometimes not a party. But so often in society, I think people are looking for what's better down there.
Right.
And instead, how can we recommit ourselves to the yes of our marital vows so that we make this party something so fantastic that we don't need to look down there at what's better? And that's a daily struggle. I mean, I don't know if you're married or not, but I am. Yes. And that's a daily recommitment to the person that we love, the person that we stood in front of the altar with and vowed, to God to give our lives
36 years now.
Yes, so, congratulations.
Right.
So you understand what I'm saying here.
Yes. You say, my marriage is not a team of two individuals, but rather a melding of two hearts making mutual sacrifices toward common goals. And that's a thing that's really been lost a lot in today's society, because there's been this emphasis on keeping your own identity, keeping your money on this, protecting yourself, almost going into it with this half-protected, well, in case this doesn't work out, I got to have a parachute.
Exactly, and I think for Greg and I, that's, we married relatively young and kind of growing up together and growing in our faith together and as parents together, we realized that, if we don't work in tandem with one another, it's not going to work.
Right, exactly. Otherwise, you end up with what they used to call marriage and kind of married singles, where you're on parallel paths, you're next to each other, but you're actually not on the same path.
And it can happen so easily. And with my husband, he's a busy emergency room doctor, and I'm busy in my life right now too. So this kind of daily commitment to how we communicate with each other.
And he's doing such great work. Look, he's helping all of these people, and you're doing all these things in the parish or things like that. And it's easy for people to get caught up into those jobs and those roles and forget their primary as husband and wife. Right.
And parents of our two sons.
Right, exactly. And it comes out. This was the chapter I jumped to, the grace of no, because I think this is a really important one. You say, I learned early on that all volunteer hours are not created equal. What did you mean?
Okay, so my children attended Catholic schools. Part of a Catholic school commitment is traditionally service hours or volunteer opportunities for the school. And I was tapped early on to do a big fundraising committee, which I learned quite quickly that I'm not good at, and that my gifts don't lie there. So I transitioned into my job as school webmaster. That for me, I was really begrudgingly doing that service, the first one, and then the second one became my passion, my life's passion. It's
interesting how by getting involved, though, and then in a sense being moved away from something, there was something else that actually was the path for where you wanted to go. But you had to step out first for that other door to open. But I like the idea, because I always used to say to my lovely wife, who would say yes, I say sometimes no is the right answer.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Because you can get caught up in organizations where they say thank you for your yes, thank you for your yes. So you say, far from being a contradiction, a well-discerned negative seems to be a survival skill when you begin to live the grace of yes. For some of us, saying no is far more challenging than diving into a new opportunity and figuring out the details later. Was that tough for you?
It's a discipline that I still work on, this idea of pausing when I'm asked to do something and asking whoever is inviting me to do that, to have a moment, a few days to pray, to discern it with my husband. I think we owe it to ourselves before we jump headlong into every commitment we're offered, you know, to really discern whether or not this is going to be something that works along with our primary vocation. And if it's feeding our soul, and if we're on every committee at church, and that means we never pray, you know, we never have dinner at our dinner table, that's not of God. I don't think that's of God.
Right. You have to step back and you say here, one friend shared her pastor's advice to listen to that small voice in your gut that's telling you to slow down when you're asked to be involved with a project or committee. Because you can have burnout, just like priests have burnout and other people have burnout. You can burn out on the most wonderful things in the world. And then the question is, what's left for your primary, for your husband, for your family, for the people you need to take care of and reach out in your life? You know, it really is the question, the great Catholic image of balance. We always have to balance what's going on. Like you say here, how does this situation impact my primary vocation as wife and mother? You know, because it's great. And for some of us too, if we get in and we say we're doing this wonderful work, but then we have to stop and say, am I doing it because I want to do this? I'm doing this because I feel good, because people think, see me as important or successful, or they chose me.
And again, it goes back to, what are we putting out there of ourselves? You know, am I the church lady who's, you know, head of every Bible study committee, and yet I never read my Bible? So
you say saying no to ourselves, right? If you're someone who has never struggled with self-doubt, moderation, or ego, I invite you to skip the rest of this chapter and move along. I'm assuming no one has.
Did you skip it?
I did not skip this chapter. In fact, I went back and read it from the beginning. But the line, say what you mean what you say, but don't say it mean.
Yeah, so for any of your viewers out there who've ever had any interaction with 12-step, I have loved ones who've struggled with addictions. That's a phrase there. This mean talk that we say to ourselves, how we, you know, beat ourselves
up. Right, yeah, right.
That's not what God has for us, and that's not going to lead us to the ultimate goals that we have in our lives. He doesn't address us that way. He didn't create us that way. We're better than that. Right.
In some ways, the self-talk we need is a little more positive self-talk to at least acknowledge our faults, but then focus on the things that we're doing better, or we have done better.
And do this in you know, companionship with so many great resources within the church that can help us find healing and wholeness in our yes.
Right, exactly. Now, in addition to this book, The Grace of Yes, 8 Virtues for Generous Living, I just want to touch on a couple of your earlier books, The Handbook for Catholic Moms, Nurturing Your Heart, Mind, Body, and Soul. Now, was this your first book then?
It was. That's not me on the cover.
I was going to say.
So
I just thought it was interesting that they chose a book for Catholic moms, and she's out by this pastoral-looking river, as opposed to sitting in her living room
or in her laundry room, which is where
most moms spend their time trying to read.
So the idea of this book is kind of related in that picture, which is moms are so busy caring for everyone else that often we neglect our own self-care, whether that's in our relationships and our physical care, or most importantly, our spiritual care. We make sure everyone else has said their prayers before bedtime, but have we said our own? So this book really is aimed for moms at encouraging you to take the efforts that you need to nurture yourself, because that way you better serve your family.
Very similar in a sense to what you're saying in the other book, which is that we have to make sure we don't overextend ourselves in any way, whether it's in the home or outside the home.
Yes, and while this book really deals with this idea of generosity of spirit, that we err on the side of being giving of ourselves to the world around us because of who we are as Catholic Christians, this book really is, you know, what detriment we do to our families when we don't take care of ourselves, and how to kind of practically avoid some of those mistakes.
Right, you can't give what you don't have. Right, exactly. And also, you also did, was this your follow-up, a Book of Saints for Catholic Moms?
Yes, that came about a year after the handbook, a Book of Saints for Catholic Moms. It's 52 companions for nurturing your heart, mind, body, and soul. And spiritual companions.
One of the things that struck me was they're not all women.
No, about 40% men.
Okay, and one of the early ones was Saint Zita of Lucca.
Yes.
Where did you find all these people? Was this from Butlers or something?
You know, I loved
what?
researching this book because when you 52 is a lot, and about half of them were saints that I already knew, and the other half were saints where I had a theme that I wanted to write about, and I went looking for companions. And so Butlers was part of that. The internet, definitely a great Catholic resource library of saints, and coming to know their stories and then relating them back to my own as a Catholic wife and mother. What do I take away from the lessons that they left behind, and then how do I pray through their intercession for different parts of my vocation?
And also in reading through, you realize that their lives were a little messy too, and it wasn't that
Absolutely.
everything was so perfect and pristine. So you understand when you're in the midst of your own struggles and that your life's not perfect, that's no different than the way it's been for anyone, but you don't have to necessarily end up there.
Right.
And you're on your way. Let me just ask you, since you're fairly prolific, another book in the works?
I'm actually working on some children's fiction, chapter books for children. It's going to be very exciting. Those will be out early next fall, and it's an exciting time for me.
Okay, very good. Well, it's exciting to have you here.
Thank you,
Lisa.
Doug.
Great to have you here on Bookmark, speaking with Lisa Hendey about a couple of her works. The Handbook for Catholic Moms, that was her first book, and a Book of Saints for Catholic Moms, 52 Companions for Your Heart, Mind, Body, and Soul, also available through the catalog. And her latest one, The Grace of Yes, 8 Virtues for Generous Living, published by Ave Maria Press, available through the EWTN Religious Catalog, EWTNRC.com. Check it out. Check us out next time right here on EWTN's Bookmark. Thanks.